There are many outside our state pushing policies that prevent people from fully enjoying access to their public lands. Roughly 2/3 of Utah is federally owned. Stop and think about that just for a moment. We have counties with over 90% federal ownership. Imagine trying to run a county when 90% of your property doesn't pay property tax and you can't control what happens. As I'm sure everyone is aware, today is Earth Day. It is entirely fitting that we are gathered outside for this hearing. Earth Day reminds us of how fortunate we are as Utahns to live amongst such astounding natural beauty and of the unparalleled opportunities that exist in this state for enjoying the great outdoors. Yet these opportunities face significant threats. There are many outside our state pushing policies that prevent people from fully enjoying access to their public lands. Roughly 2/3 of Utah is federally owned. Stop and think about that just for a moment. We have counties with over 90% federal ownership. Imagine trying to run a county when 90% of your property doesn't pay property tax and you can't control what happens. So any burdensome restriction or red tape limiting access has a disproportionate impact on our state's residents and can substantially reduce their quality of life. In the most rural part of my district, over 90% of certain counties are public lands. Across our state, federal mismanagement and overreach has raised housing costs, starved local governments of needed tax revenues, limited economic opportunities, and deprived residents of the ability to engage in multiple uses of nearby public lands. Utahns know best how to manage these lands, and I will continue to fight to increase their stewardship of them in their own backyard. Take the housing issue, for instance. Utah currently suffers from the 7th highest housing prices in the nation. Between 2017 and 2022, only a 5-year period, the average home price of a home in Utah nearly doubled. Our state leaders have taken big strides to counteract this crisis, but there's only so much that can be done when the federal government owns so much land. In fact, a recent study showed that if the federal government were to free up a mere 0.1% of all its land holdings, less than 1/10 of 1%, for residential development, housing would become newly affordable for 4.7 million Americans. That would address 35% of Utah's housing shortages. This is why I introduced the House Act with Senator Lee to allow local governments to nominate certain parcels to build affordable housing. These are areas ripe for development, lacking any conservation value and going completely unutilized due to federal law. My bill is just one piece of the puzzle, but a critical one to support local governments who are completely surrounded by federal lands with economic development. Washington County has done an incredible job accommodating the people moving into this area at a historic rate. They need all the tools available with no federal red tape as they work to lower water consumption to accommodate this growing population, a truly incredible feat by one of the fastest growing counties in the country. The federal government has also disregarded collaboration to instead use the deeply divisive Antiquities Act. These actions happen at the whim of the sitting president with barely any consultation or regard for Utahns who live closest to the boundaries of these monuments. Despite having the most to lose from these preservationist policies, the voices have routinely fallen on deaf ears of the fairway in D.C. This federal intrusion jeopardizes the very freedoms of outdoor lifestyles that attracted so many to Utah in the first place. Not long ago, the federal government proudly advanced policies that encouraged state and local interest out west. Our farmers, ranchers, energy production, and cities flourished as a direct result. That is what we mean when we talk about conservation, empowering local communities who live closest to these lands to steward them in an environmentally and economically responsible way. And those ideas don't have to be mutually exclusive. If we are to restore any semblance of that arrangement, we will have to begin by empowering local communities like Hurricane and St. George. To that end, I am proud to have led the various initiatives that would stop federal overreach and put Utah back in the driver's seat on conservation. This includes legislation that I introduced last year called the Western Economy Security Today Act, or WEST Act, which passed out of the Natural Resource Committee and will soon head to the House floor. My bill would permanently withdraw the BLM's so-called public lands rule. This rule, which the BLM finalized just 4 days ago, undermines the agency's statutory multiple-use mandate and limits access to Utah's public lands for energy and mineral development, grazing, forest management, and recreation. The rule favors wealthy individuals and environmental groups by creating a new, convoluted leasing system that will allow them to lock up lands that belong to all Utahns. I sent a letter nearly 1 year ago to 13 of my natural resource colleagues asking the agency to hold more public listening sessions on this rule, including holding a session for Utahns. The agency ignored this request and finalized this rule without hearing from you. The combination of these two rules would fundamentally upend multiple uses of our lands and the Western way of life. Any new use of federal land should be initiated by Congress, not the will of one person. By advancing this legislation, we are promoting true conservation, rooted in local input rather than preservationist policies handed down by the Biden administration. I also never hesitate to brag that Utah has robust energy and mineral production on public lands, some of the cleanest in the world. This production on public lands is critical to everything from funds for Utah schools and shoring up the domestic supply. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to the insights that each of you will bring to this important discussion. With that, I will now...